All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Future-Proofing Your Marketing Technology Stack. Before we kick things off, I just wanted to make sure to call attention to the questions tab on your screen. Feel free to use this throughout the presentation, and we'll address as many as we can at the end. To kick things off, I thought I would do a quick introduction. My name is Becky Leonard, and I'm a part of the Telium Marketing Organization. For those of you not familiar, Telium is a leading provider of customer data solutions and tag management. As both a marketing team and a marketing solutions provider, we spend a lot of time thinking about not just how to make our customers' lives easier, but how to provide value to the community of marketers as a whole. And today's webinar topic is something that we've been spending a lot of time and energy thinking about. To look into some of our inspiration on this slide here from an industry perspective, I don't need to show you the famed super graphic, as I'm sure you have all seen it many, many times, but it is a very clear representation of just how crowded and chaotic this space has become with almost 3,900 vendors and 87% growth just from 2015 to 2016. From there, it's been reported that 40% of us are using between 6 to 9 different marketing technologies in a given month, but only 9% of us have all of the marketing technology that we need and are fully utilizing it. So I think that's very telling. Inspired by this industry data, we decided to go ahead and poll our own customer base, which is, a large community of marketers, to try to derive just some additional insights and some benchmarks. And I'm just going to give you a quick summary here of what we discovered. About 56%, just over half of our customer base are evaluating new marketing technologies frequently or regularly. So that's a fairly high percentage. But on the flip side, only 67% are only deploying those new technologies once, twice a year. So while there's a lot of evaluating going on, there's not a lot of deploying that is then happening. We can infer that this may be due to some less than compelling evaluation and demonstrations by marketing solution providers, but we can also look at the next question, which goes into the level of difficulty when it comes to deployment of marketing technologies, where 86% of those polled rated it as difficult or very difficult to get those new technologies deployed, either due to technical factors or organizational factors or some combination of the two. From there, we went into the planning process and how our community of marketers is approaching technology planning at the moment. And it's no surprise that consistent with a good majority of the respondents looking and frequently evaluating technologies, that 47% are engaging in a dynamic planning process. From a priorities perspective, it's, again, for those engaging in a dynamic planning process, they're prioritizing agility over stability. So it's no surprise that this 47% matches up with that dynamic planning 47%. There are a good number, though, of those we polled that are focused on either achieving long-term stability or short-term efficiencies, which we did find interesting. And then finally, aligned with the planning process, we looked into what the priorities are when looking to make new marketing technologies investments. Despite such a high number of our respondents seeking agility and engaging in that dynamic planning process, it was interesting to see a majority answering here that they're focused on either compatibility or efficiency when it comes to the marketing technologies that they're choosing. Our presenter today, David Raab, has some thoughts on this and a number of the points we just looked into, and he'll go into those thoughts in just a moment. And on that note, I will introduce David. It's my pleasure to have him here today. He's a seasoned industry analyst who advises marketers on this very topic of the marketing technology planning process and the associated analytics necessary to make sure those marketing technologies are effective. And so I'm going to go ahead and let him share his guidance and wisdom with you. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, David.
Great, Becky. Thank you very much, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Those are some really interesting statistics, and actually I'll talk a little more about them in a minute. But if you start with today, where we have Scott Brinker's, 3,800 vendors, and you sort of go back in time, go back about 30,000 years, give or take, when there was exactly one marketing technology, which was cave painting. And here we have what I'm pretty sure is an advertisement for a restaurant, and they're advertising that they have really fresh meat, and they're advertising that the kids are going to get all excited, and they may even be advertising that they have live music on Saturday night. I think that's how I interpret this cave painting. Some people may disagree. But the point of it is that when you were a cave painter and you were your marketing technology investments were really pretty simple. You could pretty much be sure that the tools that you invested in today were the tools that you were going to need tomorrow and 10 years from now, and as long as you lived, and probably your grandchildren would be using pretty much the same tools, because nothing really changed for thousands and thousands of years. If we skip over several millennia or several dozen millennia, I'm not going to actually take you through the entire history of marketing technology. If you go back about 30 years and you look at what the technology of the day was, like a really advanced marketing technology stack in 1986 would have done direct mail. Would have done really fancy direct mail. And there was really fancy direct mail systems back in 86. So if you had invested in that and you said, yeah, I'm going to build the best direct mail system in the world, 10 years later, you would have solved the wrong problem, because email is dominant. And if you then go out and built this fabulous email system, 10 years later, you would have been wrong again, because desktop web was really kind of the hot thing in 2006. And today, again, desktop web's kind of old hat. Now it's all mobile. So is there anybody out there who thinks that mobile is it, and that we can safely now invest in mobile in the assumption that it's not going to change? Almost surely not. In fact, I'm sure no one would make that mistake. So the question is, okay, if we can't optimize around a technology because we know the technology is going to change, how do we buy? Okay, and we saw that people were stressing agility and stability and efficiency, so they were sort of making some judgments. But we really need to think, what do I do when I don't have a stable environment? How do I make any kind of decision? The traditional approach was the waterfall, and there are, I guarantee you, plenty of people in your IT department who still think about waterfalls, and maybe not so many marketers anymore. And we only saw that 16%, and I say only, 16% are still using the waterfall. It is totally obsolete. It's totally ridiculous. There's no way in the world that the waterfall is really going to give you a good result, because the waterfall assumes stability. The waterfall assumes that, yeah, I can have a business strategy. That's not going to change. My marketing strategy is not going to change. And I'll derive my programs and my requirements, and I'll just kind of go off in this very nice sort of logical way of doing things. I'll get down to system requirements, and then I'll buy the systems that meet those requirements. Well, those systems meet today's requirements, if you're lucky. Let's assume that it's mobile as your key requirement. But you can guarantee they're not going to meet tomorrow's requirements. So waterfall just is not going to work as a way to do it. So what do we do instead? Now, if we looked at the numbers that Becky just showed us, they looked at MarTech prioritization. It was the highest one was compatibility. 38% of the people were buying based on compatibility with their current architecture, which, if you think about it, is a little scary, because you know that architecture is going to have to change. 33% on efficiency, which, again, the waterfall is great for efficiency, but again, you can only optimize, you can only make things really efficient if they're stable. It's very hard to optimize in a dynamic environment. And 22% were looking at flexibility, which is kind of closer to probably what you really have to do, because you can't predict the future, but you do know it's going to be different from today. It's the only sound prediction that you can make. So you have to optimize for flexibility, which is, we see only 22% of the people in Becky's survey were doing that. So how do you optimize for flexibility? And, one word, Benjamin, one word, modularity? And Benjamin looks a little perplexed, and maybe you look a little perplexed, and I trust you've all seen The Graduate. Modularity, by which I mean designing a framework of system architecture where you can swap out components without the architecture stopping working. Okay, so being able to swap out individual components, replace them as necessary, and keeping your marketing operation running. That's what we mean. That's what I mean by modularity here. So how do I do that? The way I do that is I think about the different functions that my marketing system has to do overall to do my marketing end to end, and I buy different components to provide each of those functions, so that when a component changes, I can just replace that component with a more modern one and still have it connect to everything up and down the chain and make it work. So what are the functions? How do I organize my modules? Well, roughly, in very high-level terms, we might look at, say here's a set of functions. These are things I know I'm going to have to do, and these will never change. These are even our cave painter probably had to do some version of this. He had to assemble customer data. Right? And assembling customer data is a big project. It's probably the biggest project most customer data platforms do, of course. Because I'm going to have many sources, and I know I'm going to have new sources. So I have to have something that is itself flexible even with inside the module. The formats of those are going to change. The data types are going to change. I'm going to start having video, and virtual reality, and location data, and kinds of data, Internet of Things data, stuff that we can barely even conceive of 10 years from now will be old hat. So we have to have a very flexible customer data assembly function. We have to be able to identify people and associate them across platforms. Extremely important to recognize that this cookie, this mailing address, this email address, this device are all the same person or might be the same person. So identity association is a really critical part of that customer data assembly function. Okay? We need a separate set of functions relating to planning and budgeting, and on the other end of it, performance evaluation. So analytics, basket term for all that. We need a set of functions around building and managing content. And it's got to be cross-channel content, or at least content that I can relate across channels, because I'm not going to use the same content in my call center where there's a script as my web page where I have a banner ad or something like a banner ad, but I need to know that I have some correlation. So if going down to the next one, when I select my customer treatment, this is the best treatment for this customer regardless of channel, now I have to go out and look at my content and say, okay, the best thing right now is to upsell them on plastics, so here's my plastics content. And it may go out on the email. If I'm sending him an email, it may go out on the website if he's on the website. Maybe a call center message if he's in the call center. But it's got to be related so I know the meaning of that content so I can be consistent. So I need a customer treatment system that's touch point channel independent. And then finally, I need tools to deliver messages. I need my email system. I need my website. I need my call center. I need my email system. Did I say that? All those different systems, which are probably different systems. Not one system going to do all that. In fact, if you had one system that claimed to do it, you would want to be very skeptical. There are some vendors who do that, but even they tend to have sort of different modules within their own systems to do it. But whatever it is, I want to be able to, again, connect that to all the other pieces of this architecture and swap out, change email providers, change content engines, change evaluation systems, change customer data platforms, without everything else being so tightly connected to it that I have to change everything else as well. So roughly you want to think in terms of these functions or some other collection of functions that works for you. Nothing magic about this particular list. What is it, the next question, then of course, well, what makes it modular? Okay, I'd say I have these functions. How do I know that the thing I'm looking at is modular or not? Maybe it says modular on the box, but what does that mean, right? So there are a few things you want to look for. You want to look for open APIs, by which I mean, and open API is a more technical meaning, but I'm simply saying that the API is published. I know what it is. I can access it. I can write to it. I can pull data out through it. Most API, hopefully you have bidirectional access to your data, so you can put data in and pull it out of varying kinds. I have a flexible data model, and there's that word flexible again. Extremely important that all of my different components are able to deal with whatever changes, whatever new kinds of data I come up with. That's most important, obviously, on the customer data platform layer itself, but other things have to also talk to that. If you have a system over here that deals with individuals and a system over there that deals with, say, accounts, if you're in the B2B world, or with households in the consumer world, there's a mismatch, and it's really hard to make those two systems work together. So I have to have both flexibility and a certain level of consistency between them. I need real-time execution, and that's really an interesting one. Because, most of what I do isn't real-time, I hear you saying in the background. That's true. Things like email, not real-time at all, right? But if I'm going to use the same tools to run all my channels, say for things like message selection, content delivery, or content management, and one of those has to be real time, then my tool has to be real time capable, even if it's only used in a fraction, even if it's only used in a minority of the cases. I have to have a tool that supports all my cases. So if I have one real time requirement anywhere, I have to be real time, and it's going to have to flow through all the different layers of my stack, all the different modules. Because again, if there's one break in the chain, then it doesn't matter that 4 of the 5 work. If the 5th one doesn't do it for me and I need it in real time, then I'm out of luck. I can't do it. Cloud-based is an interesting, I put it there as a maybe, because most of today's marketing technology systems are in fact cloud-based. And that's nice, and most cloud systems have APIs, and they're sort of designed to interconnect with each other, so they're almost inherently modular, but not always, and there are plenty of on-premise systems that can work in this world as well. So, it doesn't have to be cloud-based, but sort of like the odds are it will be cloud-based. And the cloud-based guys just, again, sort of built to a lot of these requirements just because they're in the cloud. They know they're not going to have a complete solution, most of them. So absolutely need to be cloud-based, but it's probably sort of an indicator that it's more likely to be a modular system than not a modular system. So far, that's all great. We've been talking about technology, but technology's only a part of it. If you have the 3 stooges running your marketing department, which I hope you do not, the best technology in the world is really not going to solve your problem, right? So there's more to it than just technology. You have to have the people, you have to have the processes, the organization, the incentive systems, all these other things that are focused primarily around flexibility, because any one of those things can gum up the works in a literal sense of slowing you down, getting the gears not to mesh smoothly, and making things not be as flexible as you need them to be. So what are we looking at for a flexible organization? We need to have kind of an integration-first technology vision that says, I am going, and maybe flexibility first, another way to look at it. I'm going to look at systems that can connect to other systems and connect in such ways that it's easy to plug them in and unplug them and replace them. So my whole technology vision has to start with this notion, not just of flexibility, because you could have one tightly integrated system that's highly flexible, but also of modularity and of integration. So that's going to be a driving requirement. So I'm going to only buy systems that easily connect to other systems, and to any other systems, not just the systems that are developed by a particular vendor. I'm going to have decision methods that run across departments so that everybody can work together, because everything's going to kind of touch everything else. I'm going to need some new staff skills about change management, for example. I'm going to need some processing capability from cross-department perspective, because this world now it's a cross-channel world, or omni-channel, take your whatever you prefer. And people have to work across channels because lots of people are technical specialists today. I'm an email person. I'm a webmaster. I'm a call center manager, and they have their system, and they really are focused on that. So they're not all that into things like integration and managing for change and accommodating things from outside are really not their priority. In fact, they're very resistant to that in many cases. So I really need to have processes that force people to look outside departments. That comes to things like incentivization and training, important stuff like that. I'm going to have technology evaluation methods that, again, focus specifically on integration and flexibility. It's not just about the features. It's not just about efficiency. It's not even just about the flexibility of the tool itself. It's about this integration, this modularity, this ability of the tool to work within a modular architecture, which is simply a different set of requirements than the traditional functional requirements that we've always looked at. So I really have to sort of change the way I think about how I'm buying technology. I have to recognize that I'm buying it all the time. It's not like a project that has a beginning and an end. It's an ongoing process. And we saw in Becky's data there that about half the people actually kind of grasp that, which is a good thing. But you really have to kind of internalize it. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. And I have to be able to think about balancing the current functionality versus obsolescence. Yeah, I know eventually everything I buy is going to be obsolete. That's okay. But, what am I willing to give up in terms of current functionality to defer that obsolescence, to be a little more flexible? And what am I willing to say, I know something better is going to come along a year from now. I'm just going to wait for a year. It's a really tough choice, buy now or wait now, because I know there's always going to be something better. So I'm always going to have the option of waiting for something better, but sometimes you really need it now. So you have to just figure out how to balance those things. That's not an easy balance to make. And then, kind of above all else, I just have to be changed. And I just have to, again, change has to be my default assumption. I just have to assume that everything is going to change. And I have to be, dare I say, cheerful about it. I have to say, yes, change is good. I'm just a delightful thing that I'm going to be changing constantly. And maybe you don't believe that. And again, those technical specialists, the guys who spent their whole life learning how to code and HTML, and now HTML5 comes out, and they're like, oh, I don't do HTML5. Well, that's not a change-friendly mindset. Okay, so you have to really be sort of open to change and see it as a good thing, not a threatening thing, not an infrequent thing. Recognize, they're in the long run, we're all dead, as Keynes said. There's no long-term best solution. There's a bunch of interim solutions that we're going to make our way through. We have to make sure that those are good solutions, but that they also don't lead us down to a dead end that prevent us from making some future change. So there's a bunch of organizational issues that you really need to think about and you really need to work on, because it's much easier to change technology than it is to change your organization. Going back to the Three Stooges, right? There were a lot of Three Stooges. They did all kinds of different things, but they were always the same disorganized bunch of people, and that was the fundamental problem that they had. So they were organizationally wrong. It didn't matter what technology they used. They still had an organizational problem. So what's different between the old way and the new way? We really need to sort of, the only way you've made a change, the only way you've accepted this new way of thinking about things is to compare it to the old way and say, what am I doing differently? And I haven't really found the differences on this slide. Maybe I'll do that after. All right, so if you think of it as flexible first, and I'm going to compare that with efficiency first, and really it's modular versus non-modular, but whatever. They really are different ways of doing things, all right? I'm going to start with flexibility. I'm going to start with the architectural goal of flexibility. I'm not going to start with my marketing programs and then divide my requirements from my marketing programs, which is the old way. And my endpoint is component criteria. We just talked about that. It's not an architecture. I don't say, here's the perfect architecture. I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to be great. It's never going to change. So no, I have a bunch of sort of loosely coupled components. And so I have to fit my goal in my design process to figure out what those component criteria are going to be. There's an attitude of how often I change my components, often versus rarely. I'm going to select my minor components, not my big ones, not my customer data platform, my core customer decision engine, on functionality, best of breed, basically. They're going to be compatible, and we're going to assume that there's plenty of good stuff out there that is compatible and modular. And then I'm just assuming that it meets that criteria of being sort of modular. I can just find the best one that I want, as opposed to in the old day, and this showed up in some of Becky's data here, where people, the highest thing was 38% of people were selecting on compatibility with their existing stack. That's not the same as flexibility at all. They're saying, I'm a Adobe shop or an Oracle shop or IBM shop, whatever shop I am, and I have to or Salesforce shop, and I'm going to have to make sure that whatever I buy is compatible with that. It's the absolute opposite of modularity, and that's where a lot of people get stuck. My staff and processes, again, I'm going to assume that they're dynamic. I'm going to assume that if my staff needs new skills, I'm going to get those new skills. I'm not going to say, my staff doesn't know how to do this, therefore we're never going to do it. My processes don't allow for this, therefore I can't change my process, because changing processes is hard. It comes back to change management. So, I just can't even think about that. No, I'm going to be done. I'm going to assume that I can make those changes, not assume that they're fixed. And again, my attitude towards text acquisition is it's an ongoing process. It's not an infrequent. It's a process, not a project. I want to be a little glib about it. So fundamental differences. This is how you know that you're doing one and not the other. If you made this change, if you're willing to sacrifice, the way you know that you prioritize something is if you sacrifice something else to get to it. So you can say, yeah, we're going to be flexible, but we're never going to give up any functionality or any efficiency. You really haven't committed to anything. So you really have to say, I'm going to give up. I'm going to sacrifice some flexibility, some functionality. I'm going to sacrifice some efficiency in order to be flexible, to be modular. That's how you know that you've really made that transition. So, talk a little more depth here about specific options that we might have in terms of architectures. Raab Associates, we always talk about data, decisions, and delivery as sort of the three layers. So there's a data layer which has all your customer data in it that comes from all different places, and you have a decision layer, which is where you're selecting the customer treatments, and analytics and content management and planning all fall in the decision layer just because there's no place else to put them. And then there's the actual delivery layer, which is your email system and your web content management, things that are actually pushing messages out to the market and receiving inputs, real-time interactions with your customers. So those are the three layers. And any of these architectures are possible. You can have what we refer to as a hub, where the data is just kind of going in and out of some central system, but it's all being pushed back to separate silos. And as long as you're actually moving all the data around, so all the different silos are sort of having their own copy of the same data, that's an okay way to do it. It has some advantages. Mostly it lets you keep your silos in place, but still have some level of coordination. The next one from the left is the customer data platform, where there is a unified customer database, so your silos, which are still going to have their own data because there's no way to avoid that, but most of the data they will be referencing is stored in some central database that's unified, takes data in from all the sources, does all the identity association, does all the formatting and stuff to make it accessible, and then that can drive separate decision systems and separate delivery systems. The marketing cloud here, I'm saying let's unify both the data layer and the decision layer, so I have one decision engine, one system that's choosing what's the right message for this customer regardless of channel, and then pushing out to the individual delivery systems that message in whatever the right channel is. And then ultimately the integrated suite where I have one system that does everything. Integrated suite pretty much by definition is not modular. It's like the opposite of modular. It's one vendor has built all these things, they've connected them all very closely. Great if the vendor has everything you need. But remember, everything's changing constantly. It's pretty much guaranteed that no vendor, even if they have what you need today, is going to have what you need tomorrow and the day after that. There's always going to be something. So integrated suites are really tough to match with the kind of flexibility and modularity we're talking about. Any of the other things possible, certainly they should all be open in that marketing cloud. The decision layer in particular needs to be open to other decision systems, kind of a little predictive system over there, a little content management system over here. So as long as you're modular and flexible within the cloud, within that decision layer, that's okay. Diagram doesn't show that because it gets really messy if you try. CDP, very flexible. API Hub, probably the most flexible, but also the most redundancy, in some ways the most expensive. So any of those can work. The point is to make sure that you buy components both within the core marketing system, which is the red stuff, or the other systems, which are all the other various colors, that is modular, that can communicate with it. But think about an architecture, make sure, pick one, because this is a choice to make, and then think about making sure that you have systems that are able to connect across and integrate and again, be modular, swap in and out. So, just what did I just say? Just sort of summary. Change is here to stay. Kind of is an oxymoron, right? Change is constantly changing, but change itself will not go away. We are going to see a lot of technology change. We're not going to see it suddenly magically stabilize. Maybe we'll eventually, probably when the robots take over. But for us as marketers, as humans, we're going to see a lot of continued marketing technology change for the foreseeable future. The traditional technology acquisition methods like the waterfall and others don't work. They just can't cope with the level of change that we're talking about. So we need flexibility. That is the key, and I mean flexibility in a very specific way. Not that the systems have to be able to do different things, but they have to be able to integrate with other systems. So modularity is really what I mean when I say flexibility. Flexibility, adaptation to change, requires changes in your organization as well as your architecture. We just talked about that. Hopefully the Three Stooges will stick with you. You don't want to be the Three Stooges. You want to be somebody who can adapt and change in an intelligent fashion. The Three Stooges adapted to change. They just didn't do it very well. And finally, flexible first options. They are available. There are systems that are designed sort of with this model in mind. You do have to know where to look. They can be different formats. I'm not saying there's one architecture, but nor am I saying any system you buy will do. So you really do have to have those very specific criteria for modularity that you use to guide your decisions, and you will find it, and then you will be able to do as close as you can to future-proofing your technology. So with that, I think, Becky, I'll hand it back to you and see if we have any questions.
Absolutely. We will. We'll go ahead and end on a couple here. This first one likely relates to your slide on sort of defining modularity, but are there specific things that we should be looking for in specific vendors to see if they are more or less what you would call future-proof?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time at Robb Associates evaluating vendors. It's kind of what we do for a living. And, obviously there are the technical criteria that I already sort of walked you through about APIs and data structures, and, I spend a lot of time trying to understand. Not that hard. You ask a question, you get, what data storage are you using? Are you using Oracle? Are you using Hadoop? Are you using, Cassandra? There's a bunch of options, some of which are way more flexible than others, just inherently. So there's those technical things. Beyond that, what's the vendor's attitude towards change? Do they really want to be your one suite that does everything? They're probably not like super motivated to open up their system to be flexible. Do they? Where do even the managers come from? What have they done previously? So there's a lot of, how's the organization? What's the roadmap look like? What's their vision? So there are all those sort of squishier things that do still give you a pretty good sense of, is this a company that is really going to buy into this modularity notion that's willing to be a modular component, or in their heart of hearts they really want to own everything and therefore own you. You probably don't want those folks.
Yes. Perfect. If I can't really spend all of my time, evaluating new technologies, in a very granular way, how can I keep the time spent on that piece within reason? And on that note, how might I prioritize to make sure that time stays within reason?
Okay, that's an interesting question. And we saw that some large fraction are constantly evaluating. I think it was more than half, maybe. Say they're continuously evaluating, and then many few are actually buying, which is a good thing. You shouldn't be. Hopefully, you're being kind of thoughtful, and everything you evaluate, you don't buy. So it's not. And as they all said, deployment is difficult or very difficult. Now, first of all, we want to change that. That's the thrust of this whole presentation, is try to make it so that it's easier to do deployment, so that you can put in more things with less effort. But I'm not answering the question. The question was, how do I prioritize? This is there's a lot of research on innovation studies, and it all kind of relates to that, right? You set a budget for things like testing and evaluation. Spend 10% of your time, 10% of your tech budget on new things. So kind of give yourself a goal and put limits to it, so you don't spend too much or spend too little. But beyond that, think about what is going to have an impact. It's so easy to be just distracted by the bright and shinies. We all love the bright and shinies, okay? And look, I'm a tech analyst. I love it more than anybody. But there's really cool things, and there's things that matter. And sometimes there's really cool things that matter, and sometimes the things that matter aren't so cool. So make sure you're focusing on the things that matter. So how much of my customer base, how much of my revenue might this particular thing impact? If it's some teeny tiny little fraction, then I probably shouldn't spend too much time on it, no matter how cool it is, right? Now, if it's something that's growing, really quick, think mobile, 10 years ago, where mobile was almost nothing. 10 years ago, the iPhone didn't exist, right? So maybe 6 or 7 years ago, it was just starting to take off. But you can see that mobile was really blooming. So you can say, okay, it's a small fraction now, but I can see it's clearly going to be bigger, so I'll prioritize that. But if it's virtual reality, which has kind of been around forever and still not really there yet and doesn't look like it's going to be too important too soon, maybe I don't really need to go to that 3-day virtual reality conference, no matter how cool it would be. So think about just sort of the amount of your business that's likely to be affected, and then think about the potential change. Is it going to, in that fraction of business, is it going to double, triple? Is it going to have a 2% improvement? Big difference again. So try to just think a little clearly about putting your time on things that actually at least have a decent potential to have a material impact in your business. Another way to think about it, and I'm just contradicting myself, some people talk about, you spend a certain amount of time on sort of core things and then a certain amount of time just on the crazy wild, peripheral or fringe things, and that's another way to think about it too. So you want to have a mix of that. You can think in terms of portfolio theory. Some people think of it, I'm going to have some stable things and then some crazy wild things and some other things like that. So whatever you do, there are different ways to think about it. Be kind of systematic about it. Don't put in too much time. Don't put in too little time. Try to spend your time in a way that's going to somehow, optimize your results in the mix of your efforts.
Perfect. That's really great advice, David. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up on that note. To answer a housekeeping question that came in, we will send out the slides following the presentation, as well as a white paper that David has just recently authored on this very topic that can provide some additional guidance on future-proofing your marketing stack. So thank you so much, David, for all your great insights, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you, Becky. Take care, everybody.